Amara Johnson stood outside the doors of her new school, the cold metal of her backpack strap digging into her shoulder. The bell rang loudly, signaling the beginning of another day, but it felt more like a warning to her. She had never been one to draw attention to herself. She wasn't the kind of girl who wore neon-colored clothes or who had a loud laugh that echoed through hallways. No, Amara was quiet, reserved, even. She'd spent most of her life finding solace in the piano keys, where she could express herself without saying a word. But today was different. Today, she had to walk into this strange new world and pretend everything was okay. She took a deep breath, running her fingers through her curly hair. The nerves that had built up in her stomach since the moment her father told her they were moving again were still there, twisting like a knot. Amara hated being the new kid. Every time they moved, it was the same. She had to fight to be seen, to fit in, to make friends. But she always felt like an outsider, as though she were watching life happen from the sidelines. "Hey, you okay?" Maya, a girl from her homeroom, stood beside her, her voice soft but steady. Maya had noticed Amara earlier in the day, sitting by herself in the cafeteria. She had a kind smile, the kind that made Amara feel like she might just belong somewhere, if only for a moment. "I'm fine," Amara muttered, not wanting to admit that the butterflies in her stomach were more like a swarm of angry bees. "Just nervous." Maya nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's tough being the new kid. But, hey, it gets easier. I promise." Amara managed a small smile, the first real one she had all morning. It wasn't much, but it was something. The bell rang again, signaling it was time for their first class of the day. As Amara stepped into the music room, the weight of the moment hit her again. She had spent years honing her skills on the piano, learning pieces by heart, finding solace in the rhythms that spoke to her when no one else could. But here, in this room full of strangers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't meant to be there. The room was filled with chatter as students shuffled in, the sounds of excitement filling the air. Amara just stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. "Take a seat, Amara," a voice called out. It was Mr. Thompson, her new music teacher. His voice was firm but carried an undertone of something else, something that felt dismissive. She didn't know why, but something about the way he said her name made her feel smaller than she already did. She nodded, walking over to the nearest empty seat, hoping to avoid attention. Mr. Thompson didn't seem to care about her nerves, though. He was already too busy organizing his lesson plan, setting the stage for whatever he had prepared for the class. The students slowly took their seats, and the noise eventually faded into the background. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the room, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the class as though evaluating them in some invisible way. He had an air of authority, the kind of teacher who believed in rules and structure, and in maintaining control. But to Amara, he didn't seem like the kind of teacher who would care about the music itself. He seemed more interested in the power that came with being in charge. "Today," Mr. Thompson began, "we're going to be working on some classical pieces. I know some of you may have already played piano before, and others may be beginners, but I expect everyone to keep up." Amara's fingers twitched nervously on the desk. She had been playing the piano for years. She had started as a child, watching her mother's fingers dance across the keys, and had never stopped. But there was a feeling in her chest that tightened every time she thought about sharing her talent with someone who might not appreciate it. "Mr. Thompson," a voice interrupted, and Amara glanced up to see a boy in the front row raising his hand, his confidence almost palpable. "Do you think we'll be doing anything challenging? I'm kind of looking for something a little more advanced." Mr. Thompson's lips curled into a thin smile. "Don't worry, we'll get there," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But first, I want to see where everyone is starting from. Amara, why don't you play something for the class? I'm sure you've got a piece in mind." The class turned to look at her. Amara's heart thudded in her chest. She hadn't expected to be called on, and now she felt like the eyes of everyone were boring into her. Her mind went blank, as though the music she loved so much had evaporated. For a moment, she froze, her fingers curling tightly into her palms. "Don't worry, it's just a simple performance," Mr. Thompson said, the same patronizing tone in his voice. "Just play something basic for us." Amara swallowed hard, trying to force the panic down. She hadn't performed in front of strangers in a long time, and even though she had played in front of her father, it never felt the same. She got up from her seat, moving toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. Her fingers brushed against the keys, the cool surface grounding her. But even as she began, a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she played, it wouldn't be enough. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain, but she found her rhythm after a moment. Amara played a simple classical piece, one that she'd learned years ago. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't her best work, but it was something that felt comfortable. As she played, she could feel the eyes on her. Her fingers flew across the keys, but her mind raced with doubt. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Mr. Thompson didn't clap or even offer a kind word. Instead, he gave a slight nod, but the words that followed felt like a slap to her face. "Well, that was fine," he said, his voice dripping with indifference. "It's clear you've had some practice, but I think you'll find that this class is for those who want to push themselves. We don't settle for basic around here." The words stung more than Amara cared to admit. She had expected some criticism, but she hadn't prepared herself for it to feel so personal. She turned away from the piano, her cheeks burning, and returned to her seat without another word. Her fingers ached as though they were still pressed against the keys, but the warmth she had felt just moments before had been replaced by a cold sense of embarrassment. She wanted to disappear. To run far away from this place, where no one seemed to understand her, and where her passion for music was dismissed as basic. But as Amara sat there, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next, something else bubbled up within her. A quiet but undeniable voice within her heart told her one thing: she wouldn't let him, or anyone else, belittle her again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Amara Johnson had always found comfort in music. The piano had been a sanctuary for her since childhood. Her mother, Tessa, had been a renowned pianist in their small town in Georgia. People would say that Tessa had a gift, an ability to make the keys sing in a way that no one else could. Amara had spent countless hours as a child, sitting at her mother's side, watching her fingers glide over the piano's ivory keys like they were made of air. Every note played was a memory, a moment of beauty captured in sound. But those memories felt so distant now. When Amara was 6, her mother passed away unexpectedly after a long battle with cancer. Her father, Darnell, had always been a supportive presence in her life, though his work as a traveling jazz saxophonist often kept him away. He loved Amara with all his heart, but his absences meant that the bond between father and daughter was forged through their shared love of music, not constant interaction. His time on the road left him with little room for anything else, including the grief he never fully confronted after losing his wife. Amara's mother had taught her to love the piano, and her father had nurtured her love for music by introducing her to jazz. They had built a world of sound and rhythm together, but once her mother was gone, the silence that filled the house was louder than any melody. It wasn't just that her mother had passed, it was the way her absence left Amara feeling so empty. Though Amara kept playing, it was no longer the same. The spark of joy that had once come easily in her fingers had dimmed. For a while, her music became something to fill the void rather than something that connected her to her mother. When her father traveled, she was left alone with her music, but there was no joy left in the notes. Just emptiness. The piano had always been her mother's instrument, really, and now, it felt like Amara was holding on to something that didn't belong to her anymore. After her mother's passing, Amara had grown quiet, retreating more and more into herself. At school, she avoided speaking about her mother, fearing that her classmates wouldn't understand the complicated feelings she carried. While other children talked about their families, Amara often found herself pulling away from those conversations, unable to explain the hole in her heart that had only deepened with time. Still, there was the piano. Whenever she had the chance, she would sit at the keyboard and lose herself in the music, playing whatever came to mind, classical, jazz, or even a combination of both, blending the styles that her mother and father had passed down to her. It was on one of these nights, after yet another lonely evening spent practicing a piece her mother had taught her, that Amara's father came home unexpectedly. He hadn't been around much lately. His tours had taken him to distant places, and Amara could count the days he'd spent at home on one hand. But that night, when he came through the door, there was something different about him. He looked at her, sitting on the piano bench, her fingers gently brushing the keys. He smiled softly, his eyes tired but warm. "How's the music going?" he asked, his voice a familiar comfort. Amara hesitated before responding. "It's okay. I guess." Darnell walked over to the piano and knelt down beside her. "What do you mean, okay? You've got your mother's touch, you know that. I can hear it in every note you play." Amara bit her lip, looking down at the keys. "It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like it did when she was here." Her father was quiet for a long moment. He was never one to sugarcoat things, but he was also the first to remind her of her strength. "You're not your mother, Amara," he said gently, his hand resting on the piano's surface. "You're you. And that's more than enough. What she taught you, the music you love, that's your gift now, and it's something no one can take away from you." Amara's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I miss her so much, Dad." Darnell pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "I know, baby. I miss her too. But your music will keep her alive in ways that words can't. Every time you play, she's still with you." Amara didn't know how to respond, but something in his words struck her deeply. For the first time in a long while, the piano didn't seem like something that just connected her to a past she couldn't change. It felt like a bridge to something new, something she could shape. After that night, things began to change slowly. She kept playing, not just out of habit, but because she could feel her mother's presence in the music. And when her father was home, he would sit with her, and they would play together, he on his saxophone, and she on the piano. Even though he wasn't around all the time, there was a sense of peace when he was home, and it was this sense of peace that Amara clung to. Her father's words rang in her ears, "You're you, and that's more than enough." Despite this newfound sense of clarity, Amara's life was far from perfect. She was a teenager now, and the struggles of adolescence were only amplified by the weight of her past. When her father announced they were moving to a new town for his next tour, Amara's heart sank. The thought of starting over again, of being the new kid, felt like a mountain too high to climb. But it was the only life she knew. So, with a heavy heart, Amara packed her things and left behind the place that had once felt like home, stepping into an unknown future. Her first day at Eastwood High was nothing like she had expected. Her nerves were already in overdrive as she walked through the school's corridors, the whispers and stares of her new classmates echoing in her ears. No one knew her. No one knew about the piano in her life, the way music was both her salvation and her struggle. No one knew about her mother, or how she still heard the echoes of her piano playing every night before bed. Amara longed to find the same peace she once had when she sat at her mother's piano, but that peace seemed elusive in this new world. She wasn't sure if she could do this again, make new friends, navigate the awkwardness of being an outsider, and prove herself to people who didn't care about her background, her talent, or her story. But as she stood there, looking around the classroom on her first day, something inside her stirred. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, the music would help her find a place in a world that seemed unfamiliar and cold. She just had to hold on to her gift, no matter what. The first few weeks at Eastwood High had been nothing short of uncomfortable. Amara found herself caught between trying to fit in and retreating into the safety of her own world. Her classmates, for the most part, didn't seem to care much about her. Some nodded in acknowledgement when they passed her in the hallways, while others ignored her completely, as if she were invisible. But the worst part was always that feeling of being different, of standing out in a way that made her feel exposed. Music class was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace. But so far, it had been anything but. Mr. Thompson, her music teacher, had made it clear from the very first moment that he didn't think much of her playing. His cold, dismissive comments left Amara feeling small and insignificant, as though her music wasn't worthy of his attention. He'd called her performance fine, but the way he said it, the way he looked at her, made it clear that it wasn't enough. "Why don't you show us what you can really do, Amara?" he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, a dare to prove herself. And every time she sat at the piano in his class, the same pressure weighed on her chest. It wasn't just Mr. Thompson either. There were whispers in the halls, muttered comments about how the new girl thinks she's special because she can play a few notes. Amara couldn't help but overhear them. It seemed that being a gifted pianist didn't earn her any respect here. It only made her a target. Still, she continued to go to class, to play the piano, though with every day that passed, her confidence began to dwindle. She started to dread the moment when Mr. Thompson would call her up to the front of the room, and her classmates would stare at her like she was something to be judged, not admired. One morning, as Amara walked into music class, the tension in the room was palpable. She could feel the eyes on her as she made her way to her seat. Mr. Thompson was at the front, lecturing about an upcoming piano performance for the school talent show. "I want each of you to participate," Mr. Thompson said, his voice like an order. "The talent show is the perfect opportunity for you to show me what you're really capable of. And let me be clear, if you can't even handle playing in front of a small audience, you won't make it in the world of music." Amara froze in place. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't signed up for the talent show. The idea of performing in front of an audience, even a small one, sent a wave of panic through her. She had barely started to feel comfortable in her own skin here, and now Mr. Thompson was demanding that she put herself on display. She felt her stomach tighten as her thoughts raced. Her palms grew sweaty as Mr. Thompson turned his attention toward her. "Amara," he called, "you're a pianist, right? It'll be good for you to show us what you're really made of. You need to prove to the class, and to me, that you have what it takes." The room fell silent, and Amara could feel every set of eyes focused on her. She wanted to shrink into her seat, to pretend like she hadn't heard him, to escape from the weight of his words. But that wasn't possible. She had no choice but to nod, to acknowledge his challenge. "Sure," she said, though it felt like the word stuck in her throat. The days leading up to the talent show felt like a slow march to the gallows. Amara spent every free moment practicing in the music room, her fingers moving over the keys in an attempt to calm her nerves. But the music didn't feel like it used to. It didn't offer her the same escape it once had. She couldn't help but wonder if her performance would be a disaster. Mr. Thompson's words echoed in her mind, "Prove yourself." But what if she couldn't? What if the audience, her classmates, and most importantly, Mr. Thompson, saw through her? What if they found her lacking? The pressure was unbearable, and the more she practiced, the more she felt like her fingers were betraying her. She couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of failing. "Amara, you've got this," Maya said one day as they sat together at lunch. Maya had been trying to reassure her for days now. "You're amazing. I've seen you play before, you're not just good, you're incredible. You can do this." Amara gave her a small, weak smile, but deep down, she wasn't sure Maya's words were enough. Was she incredible? All she could see were her flaws, her doubts, and the looming performance that felt like an obstacle she couldn't overcome. "I don't know, Maya," she said quietly. "What if they hate me? What if I make a fool of myself?" "You won't," Maya replied, her voice firm. "You're not going to fail, Amara. You've got talent, you've got heart, and I know you can do it. You just have to trust yourself." Amara wanted to believe Maya, but there was a part of her that feared the worst. What if she froze? What if the music didn't come out right? She had never been the center of attention, and the thought of being watched by so many people, judged by them, terrified her. When the day of the talent show arrived, Amara felt like she was walking into a storm. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the strap on her backpack. The halls were filled with excited chatter, students eagerly discussing the upcoming performances. But Amara couldn't focus on anything else but the piano. Her mind raced with every possible scenario. She thought about backing out, about telling Mr. Thompson that she couldn't do it. But something inside her refused to let her quit. This wasn't just about the performance, it was about standing up for herself, about proving that she wasn't going to be silenced, even by Mr. Thompson's cruel challenges. When it was finally her turn, Amara walked onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. The spotlight was blinding, and the audience was a blur of faces. The piano sat in front of her, and for a moment, she almost froze. But then she heard her father's voice in her head, "You're you. That's more than enough." Taking a deep breath, Amara sat at the piano, her fingers brushing over the keys, ready to show everyone, not just Mr. Thompson, but herself, that she wasn't just the quiet girl from the back of the class. She was something more. Something they couldn't ignore. The first note rang out into the silence, and as Amara played, she could feel her nerves beginning to settle. The music flowed from her fingers, just like it always had, and she felt her heart slow with each note. She wasn't playing for anyone but herself anymore. She was playing to reclaim the music, to take back what had once been hers. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt a spark of hope. Amara's heart pounded as she played, each note an affirmation that she was not who Mr. Thompson or anyone else thought she was. The spotlight felt heavy on her, but the music seemed to lift her, every keystroke, every chord, took her further away from the anxieties and doubts that had consumed her since the moment Mr. Thompson had called her out. As she played, the room fell into a hushed silence. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, but this time, she didn't shrink away. This time, she embraced it. Each note she played became an act of defiance, a promise to herself that she would not let fear dictate her life anymore. The melody she had chosen was a blend of classical and jazz, her two worlds colliding to create something unique, just like her. Her fingers moved fluidly, and for a moment, it felt like she wasn't even in the room anymore. She was in another place, another world, where the music was the only thing that mattered. The audience was lost in the performance, their eyes wide, captivated by the beauty of her playing. Amara's hands moved over the keys with newfound confidence, the sound of the piano filling the room like a powerful wave. She didn't look at Mr. Thompson as she played, but she felt his presence. She could sense the disbelief in his eyes as he watched her perform, the same disbelief that had been there when he doubted her. But Amara didn't need his validation anymore. This was for her, this was about her. When she finished, there was a brief silence, a beat that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, the applause came, a flood of sound that seemed to echo in Amara's ears. It wasn't just polite applause. It was genuine. Her classmates cheered, their faces alight with appreciation. Maya was in the front row, her hands clapping enthusiastically, her face beaming with pride. But it was Mr. Thompson's reaction that Amara couldn't quite shake. She saw him standing at the edge of the stage, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Was he impressed? Disappointed? She couldn't tell. She didn't know what she expected from him anymore. Amara quickly left the stage, her heart still racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She barely noticed the sea of students who rushed up to her after the performance, praising her talent, congratulating her for her breathtaking playing. Maya was among the first to reach her, her face glowing with admiration. "Amara, that was amazing!" Maya exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. "You were incredible up there. I knew you had it in you." Amara smiled, though her mind was still occupied with the image of Mr. Thompson's hard-to-read face. "Thanks," she replied, though her voice was softer, more uncertain than she intended. "It felt okay." "It wasn't just okay," Maya insisted, her enthusiasm palpable. "You blew everyone away." Before Amara could respond, Mr. Thompson approached, his footsteps hesitant. Amara braced herself for his judgment, unsure of what to expect. "Amara," he said, his voice cool but not unkind, "I have to admit, I was wrong about you. You've got talent, real talent. You proved me wrong today." For a moment, Amara didn't know how to respond. She had prepared herself for a critique, for him to find fault with her playing, but what she heard instead was something she hadn't expected: respect. "Thanks," she said softly, trying to steady her racing heart. "I appreciate it." Mr. Thompson gave her a brief nod, his eyes scanning the crowd of students who were still buzzing with excitement. "Don't get too comfortable," he added, though there was no malice in his tone. "Now that you've shown me what you're capable of, I expect you to keep delivering." Amara couldn't help but smile at that. For the first time in weeks, she felt like her music had earned her something other than doubt. It had earned her respect. And while it wasn't a complete resolution, it was a step in the right direction. The rest of the talent show passed in a blur. Amara didn't remember much of the other performances, her mind still replaying the way the music had flowed from her fingers, the way her classmates had reacted, and the moment when Mr. Thompson had acknowledged her. But there was still the part of her that feared she wasn't truly accepted. Would this be enough? Would her performance change the way people saw her, or would it be forgotten like so many others? It wasn't until the next day that Amara's question was answered. As she walked through the halls of Eastwood High, she noticed something different. The whispers weren't about her music, they were about her performance. Her peers who had once ignored her were now speaking to her. Some nodded in recognition. Others even approached her in the hallways, complimenting her on her talent, on the raw emotion she had poured into her playing. "Amara, right?" one of the popular girls, Emma, said with a smile. "You played last night. You were awesome." Amara nodded, surprised by the kindness in Emma's voice. "Thanks," she said, her smile unsure but sincere. Another student, Chris, a quiet guy from her history class, approached her with a hesitant smile. "You really blew me away last night," he said. "I didn't know you could play like that." "Thanks," Amara said again, the words more comfortable on her tongue now. For the first time since arriving at Eastwood High, Amara felt like she belonged. The music had opened doors for her, and though the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, she could see a way forward. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was Amara Johnson, the pianist who had silenced the doubts with a melody of her own making. Later that day, as Amara sat down to her next music class, she was pleasantly surprised to see Mr. Thompson approach her before the bell rang. "Amara," he said, his tone different from before. "I've been thinking about your performance last night. You've got something special, you know that? I can see that you've been holding back, maybe even from yourself. But if you keep playing like that, you'll go far." Amara looked up at him, feeling a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed. "I'll keep playing," she said softly, her voice steady. "I have to." "Good," Mr. Thompson replied, his expression softening. "Good." As the bell rang and the class began, Amara felt something shift within her, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. The journey had only just begun. Amara woke up the next morning with a sense of quiet triumph. The applause from the talent show still echoed in her mind, a sweet reminder that she was not invisible. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally seen, not just for the girl who played the piano, but for who she truly was. The validation from her classmates, the respect from Mr. Thompson, it all felt like a victory that she hadn't expected. But amidst this feeling of accomplishment, there was something else brewing inside her, a deep, growing curiosity about what might come next. Her confidence had taken a leap, but she still carried that nagging fear inside her. She was new here. She had proven herself on stage, but would that truly change anything? Would she still be the new girl everyone whispered about? Or had she finally broken free from the shadows of her old life? As Amara walked into school that morning, she noticed a subtle shift in how people looked at her. The glances that once felt dismissive or indifferent were now filled with recognition. A few students smiled at her, offering brief nods, as if they now saw her not just as a face in the crowd, but as someone who could belong. But no matter how many small victories she experienced, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play, more than just talent, more than just the applause. By lunchtime, Amara found herself in the cafeteria, seated at a table by herself. She had been avoiding crowds for most of the morning, still processing the aftermath of the talent show. It felt good to be acknowledged, but it also felt isolating in a way she wasn't prepared for. What did it really mean for her to be seen now? Was it a genuine change, or just a momentary shift? Her thoughts were interrupted by Maya, who plopped down beside her, her tray of food in hand. "You okay?" Maya asked, her eyes scanning Amara's face with concern. "You've been quiet today." Amara sighed, looking down at her hands, still feeling the lingering tension. "Yeah, she paused, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "I don't know. Everyone's acting different toward me now, and it feels good. But also, weird." Maya chuckled, taking a bite of her sandwich. "It's probably because they didn't know what you were capable of. Now that they do, they're finally paying attention. But you're still the same Amara, right? You're not changing just because people notice you." Amara nodded, but the knot in her stomach remained. "I just keep wondering if it'll last. I don't want to be defined by a moment, you know. I don't want to be the girl who played at the talent show. I want to be someone who is more than that." Maya leaned in, her eyes serious. "You are more than that. You're more than just a performance. Don't let anyone reduce you to that. It's just a part of who you are, not the whole of who you are." Amara smiled faintly, grateful for Maya's perspective. She knew her friend was right, but there was still something deep inside her that felt unresolved. She had proven herself on stage, but the real test had yet to come. Could she truly fit in here? Would she ever truly belong? The day passed slowly, but Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something important. When school let out, she walked out into the parking lot, ready to head home, but before she could reach her car, she spotted Mr. Thompson standing near the front of the school, talking to a few other teachers. He looked up as she approached, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Amara," he called out, walking toward her. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Amara hesitated for a moment, unsure of what this would be about, but then nodded. "Of course." Mr. Thompson motioned for her to follow him toward the school's entrance, where the teacher's lounge was. "I wanted to tell you something," he began, his tone more serious than she expected. "After your performance, I started thinking about something. You have real potential, not just as a pianist, but as a person. You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Amara blinked, surprised by his question. Yeah. I've been through some tough stuff." "Well," Mr. Thompson continued, his expression softening, "I can tell. It shows in your playing. You bring all that emotion, all that struggle into the music. And it's something I haven't seen in a long time." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "Thanks," she said quietly, unsure of where this conversation was going. "But, why are you telling me this?" He paused for a moment before responding, his voice gentle. And for the first time, Amara felt like she was ready to step into the world and take her place. The days that followed Amara's breakthrough at the talent show were nothing short of transformative. She found herself walking the halls of Eastwood High with a new sense of purpose, carrying herself differently, not because of the attention she was getting, but because of how she had finally begun to see herself. The lingering doubts she had once carried felt lighter, as if they had been lifted by the music itself. The recognition from her peers had been a surprise, but it was the quiet conversations, like the one she had with Mr. Thompson, that had truly made a difference. His words had not only validated her talent but had also reminded her of her strength. She wasn't just the girl at the piano, she was more than that. She was capable of navigating the world around her, of challenging the expectations that others had of her, and of building her own future, one note at a time. Amara had grown up in a world that often told her she was invisible, too quiet, too different, too much of an outsider. But with every passing day, she realized that being different didn't have to be a weakness. It was her greatest strength. It was the very thing that made her piano playing so unique, so raw, so real. The emotions that she poured into her music came from a place of depth, of understanding, of struggle, and it was something that no one else could replicate. Her confidence continued to grow, and soon, she found herself not just participating in class but actively contributing. When Mr. Thompson asked for volunteers to perform a new piece in front of the class, Amara's hand shot up without hesitation. It was a small step, but it was one that showed her newfound willingness to take risks. She no longer feared making a mistake, nor did she fear what others might think. As she played, her classmates watched in awe, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys. It wasn't just her talent that impressed them, it was the way she carried herself now, as if she truly belonged. Maya, who had always been a supportive friend, was the first to give her a thumbs up. "See? Told you you'd do amazing," Maya whispered after class, her eyes sparkling with pride. Amara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks, Maya. I think I'm starting to believe that too." Over the next few weeks, the whispers about Amara's talent grew louder, but she never let it define her. She knew that her music was just one part of who she was. There was still so much more to explore, to discover, to experience. And she was determined to do it all on her terms. However, with success came challenges, ones that Amara hadn't anticipated. She began to notice that not everyone was happy with her newfound confidence. Some of her peers, particularly the popular group that had always looked down on her, seemed to be uncomfortable with how much attention she was getting. It wasn't overt bullying, but it was there, snide remarks, subtle exclusion. One afternoon, as Amara walked into the lunchroom, she overheard a group of students talking behind her. "I don't get it," one of them said. "She's not even that good. It's just a piano. Why does everyone act like she's the next Mozart?" Amara's heart sank, but she didn't stop walking. She didn't turn around. She kept her head high and walked to her usual table where Maya was waiting for her. "Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed," Maya said, reading the look on Amara's face. "Don't let it get to you. You know who you are." "They don't." Amara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Maya was right. It didn't matter what they thought. What mattered was how she felt about herself. But it wasn't just her peers that had something to say. As the days went on, Amara realized that Mr. Thompson had begun to push her harder in class. He had always been tough on her, but now, there was an intensity to his critiques that made her wonder if he expected more from her than he did from the other students. At first, it felt like validation. He believed in her, he saw her potential. But as the weeks went by, she began to feel the pressure weighing on her. One day, after a particularly difficult practice session, Mr. Thompson called her into his office. "Amara," he said, his voice measured. "You have talent. We both know that. But I'm going to need you to push harder. You're capable of much more than what you've shown. I want to see you take risks, go beyond your comfort zone. Amara sat there, feeling the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She had always known he was tough on her, but now it felt like a different kind of challenge. I'm trying, Mr. Thompson. But sometimes I feel like I'm being pushed too far. He looked at her, his expression softening. I'm not trying to break you, Amara. I'm trying to help you grow. You've shown me that you can rise to challenges. I believe in you. Amara nodded slowly, though a flicker of doubt remained. Could she really handle this? Could she continue to meet the high expectations that had been set for her? That night, Amara sat at her piano, the weight of everything swirling in her mind. The pressure to succeed, the fear of not being good enough, the constant desire to prove herself, everything felt like it was closing in on her. But then she placed her fingers on the keys, and for the first time in days, she let go of everything. She didn't worry about the expectations, the whispers, or the pressure. She just played. The notes filled the room, resonating with emotion. Her hands moved with confidence, the music flowing through her like a river that couldn't be stopped. As she played, a sense of peace washed over her. For the first time, she wasn't just performing for others. She was playing for herself, for her own growth, for her own healing. And that was when she realized something important. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It wasn't about winning validation or constantly meeting expectations. It was about embracing her passion, her talent, and the person she was becoming. She had already accomplished so much. She had faced her fears, silenced the doubts, and found her place in the world. As the final notes of her piece echoed in the quiet room, Amara smiled. She didn't need anyone else's approval to know that she was on the right path. Her music spoke for itself, and that was enough. Amara's new sense of self-assurance and confidence didn't last as long as she hoped. For every step forward she took, it seemed like she was met with an equal push backward. She had believed that once she proved herself at the talent show and found her place within the school, things would fall into place. But life, she learned, rarely works in such neat and predictable patterns. It was a typical Friday morning when things began to shift unexpectedly. The school bell rang, and students filed into the classrooms, chatting about the weekend, upcoming tests, and plans for the summer. But as Amara walked into her first period class, something felt off. The usual hum of conversation was muted, and she noticed a few people glance at her in ways that felt almost too calculated. As she took her seat, she overheard snippets of conversation between her classmates. They were talking about her. "Did you hear about Amara's performance at the talent show?" one girl whispered. "Yeah, it was good, but I think it's kind of overrated." "She's just lucky Mr. Thompson gave her that chance," another voice replied. Amara's stomach tightened, and she looked away quickly, pretending she hadn't heard them. She sat down and opened her notebook, but the words on the page blurred before her eyes. For the first time since the talent show, she began to question the praise she'd received. Was it really genuine, or was it just pity? Had she really earned the attention, or had Mr. Thompson given her a moment in the spotlight because he felt sorry for her? Her thoughts were interrupted by Mr. Thompson entering the classroom, his usual stern demeanor in place. "All right, class," he said, setting down his things. "Today we'll be continuing with your individual pieces. I hope you've all practiced hard. We'll be hearing from Amara first." Amara froze. She hadn't expected him to call her name, especially after what she overheard. She had been hoping for a little more time before being thrust back into the spotlight. But the room was quiet, waiting, and there was no way out. Taking a deep breath, Amara stood up and made her way to the piano at the front of the room. She felt every eye on her, and the pressure she had been trying to shake off suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. As her fingers hovered over the keys, a surge of doubt hit her. What if she messed up? What if her performance was nothing but a disappointment after all the attention she had received? She glanced at Mr. Thompson, who stood with his arms crossed, watching her expectantly. She knew he expected something great, something exceptional, just like the last time. But could she do it? Could she live up to the pressure, or would she let it break her? Amara let out a slow breath, trying to steady herself. She began to play, but the notes didn't flow like they usually did. Her fingers stumbled on the keys, and the melody felt forced. The more she played, the more she felt like she was sinking. The music didn't carry the same power it usually did, and it felt like everyone in the room was silently judging her with every misstep. When she finished, there was an uncomfortable silence. Her heart hammered in her chest as she looked up at the class. Mr. Thompson's expression was unreadable. Slowly, he nodded, though it felt like a small consolation. "Not your best, Amara," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. "You're capable of more. Take some time to work through it. We'll try again on Monday." Amara sat down, her hands trembling on her lap. Her classmates were silent, but she could feel their eyes on her. The words they had whispered earlier echoed in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were right. Maybe she hadn't really earned her place after all. The rest of the school day felt like a blur. Amara walked through the halls with her head down, her usual sense of pride replaced by an overwhelming sense of failure. The performance had been a disaster, and she couldn't help but feel like she had let everyone down, especially Mr. Thompson. She didn't want to go home feeling like this, but there was no escape from it. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Amara trudged to her locker, barely noticing the students laughing and talking around her. "Hey, Amara. Wait up." It was Maya, running toward her with a bright smile. Amara forced a smile, but she couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. "Hey." Maya studied her friend closely, noticing how low Amara's shoulders were slumped. "You okay?" she asked softly, as they walked together toward the parking lot. "You don't look like yourself today." Amara sighed, trying to push down the lump in her throat. "I messed up," she admitted. "My performance today, everyone was watching me, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't live up to the hype." Maya frowned and stopped walking, turning to face her. "What do you mean? You've been killing it. Everyone's been talking about you, Amara. No one expects you to be perfect." Amara shook her head, biting her lip. "I thought I could handle it, but today was different. I thought I had this, but now I just feel like I don't belong. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was all just a fluke, and I'm not as good as they think I am." Maya placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, gently pulling her to face her. "Listen to me, okay? You didn't mess up. You're allowed to have bad days. Everyone does. But don't let one bad moment define you. You've come so far, Amara. You've earned every bit of praise you've gotten. Don't let your doubt take that away from you." Amara looked at her friend, her eyes watering. "But what if I'm not good enough? What if I don't have what it takes?" Maya shook her head, her voice firm. "You are good enough. You have more than enough talent. And this is just one setback. It doesn't mean anything about your worth or your ability. You've worked too hard to let one bad performance make you give up." Amara took a shaky breath, nodding slowly. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe this was just a bump in the road, a challenge she had to face before she could rise even higher. With her friend by her side, Amara felt the weight of doubt start to lift, even if just a little. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. There was more to prove, and more to discover about herself than she had realized. The following weekend, Amara stayed home, determined to push through the self-doubt that had settled deep in her mind. She could hear Maya's words echoing in her head, "You've worked too hard to let one bad performance make you give up." But it wasn't easy to shake off the disappointment. The notes she had stumbled over, the awkward silence after her performance, it was all she could think about. And the thought of facing Mr. Thompson again on Monday made her stomach churn. Still, Amara knew that running away from the problem wouldn't help. She sat down at the piano in her room, the familiar sight of the keys comforting her. She ran her fingers lightly over the top of the piano, feeling the cool surface beneath her fingertips. The sound of the keys was like a call to her, one she couldn't ignore. It was in those quiet moments with the piano that Amara truly felt at peace. The world outside could be chaotic, but when she played, it was just her and the music. She had to remind herself that her connection to the piano had always been about more than impressing others. It was about self-expression, about finding a piece of herself in the music. She took a deep breath and began to play, slowly at first, allowing the melody to take form. She didn't worry about how the notes sounded or whether they would impress anyone. She simply played, letting the music guide her. As her fingers moved with greater confidence, Amara felt something inside her shift. The tension in her shoulders loosened, and the weight of her earlier performance began to lift. She remembered why she loved the piano in the first place. It was her escape, her way of communicating with the world when words couldn't express everything she felt. By the time her fingers came to a gentle stop, Amara realized that she hadn't been thinking about what others expected of her. She had been lost in the music. And that was the key, no one could take that away from her. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about playing from the heart. The next day at school, Amara felt a renewed sense of determination. She had practiced hard over the weekend, and the doubts that had once consumed her seemed more manageable. She couldn't promise herself she wouldn't ever feel nervous again, but she could promise to give her best and stay true to herself. She was ready for whatever came next. When she walked into her first period class, the usual chatter filled the room, but it felt different today. Amara didn't notice the whispers or the stares that had once made her self-conscious. She simply took her seat and pulled out her notebook, focusing on the lesson. Mr. Thompson entered the room a few moments later, just as he always did, but this time, Amara wasn't afraid of the critique that might come after class. She was ready to face him, not as someone trying to win approval, but as someone who already knew her worth. "All right, class," Mr. Thompson said, giving them all a knowing smile. "It's Monday, and that means we're diving back into your pieces. Amara, you're up first." Amara stood up and walked confidently to the piano, the same way she had before. This time, though, she felt the weight of her earlier doubts no longer pressing down on her. She didn't need to impress anyone. She didn't need to be perfect. She only needed to play her heart out. As her fingers touched the keys, a calmness washed over her. The music flowed easily, and each note felt like it was carrying her further from the anxiety she had once felt. She didn't rush, nor did she try to force anything. The piece seemed to come alive under her fingers, and the room fell into a hush as everyone watched in awe. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When she finished, there was a long silence. For a moment, Amara's heart dropped, fearing she hadn't played well enough. But then Mr. Thompson stood and clapped, followed by the rest of the class. Amara's breath caught in her throat, and she couldn't help but smile. "Fantastic, Amara," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with admiration. "That was what I've been waiting for. That was you. No holding back. You've got something special." Amara couldn't stop smiling. She had done it. Not for anyone else, but for herself. She had found the courage to play without the fear of judgment, and in doing so, she had rediscovered the joy she had always found in her music. As the class erupted in applause, Amara caught Maya's eye across the room. Her friend smiled and gave her a thumbs up, and for the first time since her performance the week before, Amara felt completely at peace. After class, Amara was about to leave the room when Mr. Thompson called her over. "Amara, can I speak with you for a moment?" Amara's heart skipped a beat, wondering if he was going to point out something she had missed or if he had more criticism for her. But when she approached him, his smile was warm, and there was something different in his eyes. "You've come a long way," he said, leaning against the desk. I've seen a lot of students, but there's something about the way you play that sets you apart. It's not just your skill, it's your ability to bring your emotions into the music. You've done a lot of growing, and I think you're ready for more." Amara's heart swelled with pride. She had worked so hard for this moment, and it felt like all of her efforts were finally paying off. But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. "I'd like to recommend you for the regional competition coming up," he said. "I think you're ready to take this to the next level. What do you think?" Amara's eyes widened in surprise. Regional competition. She had never imagined going that far, let alone being good enough to compete with others on a higher level. But as the idea settled in, Amara felt a spark of excitement ignite inside her. Maybe this was the next step. Maybe this was how she could continue to grow, push herself, and prove, most importantly to herself, that she wasn't just a girl with a piano. She was a pianist, an artist, someone who had the power to change her own destiny. "I'd love to," Amara said, her voice steady. Mr. Thompson smiled. "I knew you would. I believe in you, Amara. Let's make it happen." As she left the classroom that day, Amara felt a sense of clarity. She had learned that the most important approval she needed wasn't from her peers or from Mr. Thompson, it was from herself. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be true to her music, true to who she was, and true to the person she was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that she could do anything. The days leading up to the regional competition felt like they passed in a blur. Amara spent every spare moment practicing, sometimes for hours at a time, determined to perfect her performance. It wasn't just about impressing the judges anymore. It wasn't even about the competition. It was about proving to herself that she could stand on a stage and let her music speak for her. The pressure, however, was undeniable. As the date of the competition approached, Amara found herself increasingly nervous. Every time she sat at the piano, she couldn't help but think of the other competitors. They would be just as talented, if not more so. What if they played better? What if they had more experience? What if she didn't measure up? Despite the doubts, Amara reminded herself that she had already come so far. She had overcome obstacles she never thought she would. She had performed in front of an audience, faced her insecurities, and discovered something more profound about herself in the process. And now, it was time to see just how much she had grown. The night before the competition, Amara couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the anxiety. She tried to remind herself that nerves were normal, but it didn't help. The idea of performing in front of strangers, judges who would scrutinize every note she played, was enough to make her stomach churn. She sat up, swinging her legs off the bed, and pulled out her phone to check the weather forecast. Her fingers hovered over the screen when a message from Maya popped up. "Maya, you're going to crush it tomorrow. Just remember, don't try to be perfect. Just be yourself, and let the music do the rest. I'm rooting for you, always." Amara smiled and read the message again. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Maya always seemed to know exactly how to lift her spirits. Amara quickly typed a response. "Amara, thanks, Maya. I'll try my best. I'll keep your advice in mind." She set the phone down and returned to the piano, knowing that no matter how nervous she felt, she had one thing going for her, her love for the music. She began playing softly, slowly at first, then building momentum. As the notes flowed from her fingers, she felt the familiar sense of calm she had found over the weekend. The nerves began to subside. The music wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. With each note, Amara reminded herself that this competition wasn't her final destination. It was a part of her journey. A step forward, not an end. The morning of the competition, Amara was a bundle of nerves. She barely ate breakfast, and her hands were shaking as she packed her things. Her mom gave her a reassuring smile as she walked out the door. "You've got this, Amara," her mom said. I'm so proud of you. No matter what happens today, remember that you're already a winner in my eyes. Amara hugged her mom tightly before heading out the door. She knew her mom's words were meant to be comforting, but they only made her more nervous. It was hard not to put so much weight on this moment. What if she let everyone down? What if she couldn't perform the way she had hoped? When Amara arrived at the competition venue, she was greeted by a sea of other young musicians. It was nothing like the school talent show. The stakes felt higher, the atmosphere more intense. She looked around at the other competitors, each one looking just as determined and focused as she felt. Some were tuning their instruments, others warming up in quiet corners. A few were already talking to their parents or teachers, receiving last-minute advice or encouragement. The room buzzed with energy, and for a moment, Amara felt small. She couldn't help but feel out of place, unsure if she belonged in such a prestigious setting. The competition was fierce, and it seemed as if every student in the room had been training their entire lives for moments like this. Amara's thoughts began to race again. What if they were better than her? What if she forgot her piece halfway through? What if she failed in front of everyone? Suddenly, she heard her name being called. The sound pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to see Mr. Thompson walking toward her, his familiar face filled with encouragement. "Amara, you ready?" he asked with a gentle smile. Amara swallowed, forcing a smile back. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be." He gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You've got the talent. Now just let the music speak for itself. Don't try to impress anyone. Just play like you always do." His words helped calm her nerves a little, but the butterflies in her stomach were still there. "Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I'll try." He nodded. "I'll be in the audience, cheering for you." Amara took a deep breath and made her way to the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. As she walked toward the piano, she glanced out at the audience. There were dozens of people watching her, judges sitting at a table, parents, teachers, and fellow competitors. The room was much bigger than she had imagined, and the spotlight felt blinding. She sat at the piano, took another deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers hovered over them for a moment, and in that instant, Amara felt a sudden clarity. The nervousness, the doubt, it all seemed to fade away. This wasn't about impressing the judges. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing the music with them. It was about sharing the part of herself that she had only ever revealed through her playing. She was there to connect, not to compete. With a final exhale, she began to play. The music flowed from her fingers effortlessly, and for the first time all day, Amara felt completely at ease. Each note carried her forward, and she no longer felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just playing. When the final note echoed through the hall, Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't let the pressure control her. She had let the music do what it was always meant to do, speak for her. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, but soon the audience erupted into applause. Amara sat still for a moment, trying to process the fact that she had just completed one of the biggest challenges of her life. She had done it. She had made it through. As she stood up and walked off the stage, she caught a glimpse of Mr. Thompson in the audience, clapping and giving her a proud nod. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt a sense of peace. No matter what the judges decided, she had already won. The applause from the audience still echoed in Amara's ears as she walked off the stage. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the performance began to dissipate, leaving her with a quiet, almost surreal feeling. She had done it. She had stood on that stage, played her heart out, and had let the music speak for her. But now, there was nothing to do except wait. Amara found a seat near the back of the room, surrounded by other contestants who were all nervously chatting with their families or teachers. Some were pacing back and forth, others had their eyes glued to the stage, as if they were hoping to catch a glimpse of the judges' reactions. Amara, however, felt a mix of exhaustion and peace. She had done her best, and that was all she could control. As she sat there, waiting for the judges to make their decisions, her mind wandered back to the journey that had led her here. It felt like just yesterday that she had been sitting at her piano, doubting her abilities and questioning whether she would ever be good enough. She remembered the look on Mr. Thompson's face when he had first challenged her to take her talent to the next level, the frustration she had felt after her initial performance at school, and the sense of quiet determination that had slowly replaced her fear. For so long, Amara had been held back by the fear of failing, of not being good enough. But as she sat in the auditorium, she realized that the real victory wasn't in the applause, or the judge's decision, or even in the competition itself. The victory was in the way she had grown. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities, and to let go of the need for external validation. She was enough, just as she was. "Hey, that was amazing." Maya's voice broke through Amara's thoughts. She turned to see her best friend rushing toward her, her face lit up with excitement. Amara smiled, feeling a wave of warmth spread through her. "Thanks, Maya. I don't know what to think. It felt so good to just play, but now I'm just waiting to see what happens." Maya took a seat next to her. "You were incredible. Seriously, you owned that stage. And no matter what the judges say, you should be proud of yourself. You've come so far." Amara's smile widened, but a part of her couldn't shake the anticipation gnawing at her. The uncertainty of what would happen next hung in the air like a heavy weight. "I'm proud of myself, yeah. But I can't help but wonder what's next." "Well, whatever happens," Maya said, her tone filled with conviction, "I know you've already achieved something that most people could only dream of." Amara nodded, grateful for Maya's unwavering support. She had always been there for her, even when things seemed impossible. Amara knew that Maya had her back, no matter what the outcome. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, an announcement came over the loudspeakers, breaking the tense silence. The judges were ready to announce the winners. "All right, everyone," a voice echoed through the room. "Thank you for your patience. We will now begin the announcement of the winners. Please remain seated until your name is called." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced around at the other contestants, all of them anxiously awaiting the same moment. She couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement and fear. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for, and dreading, all at once. The judges began to call the names of the honorable mentions, followed by the finalists. Amara held her breath, trying to steady her nerves. As the names of other competitors were announced, she forced herself to remain calm, but with each passing name, the reality of the situation began to hit her. This could be the moment when she would find out whether or not all her hard work had paid off. Then, finally, the head judge stepped up to the microphone and spoke. "And now, for the grand prize winner of the regional competition." Amara's heart nearly stopped. She leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on the judge, but she felt as though the world had gone silent around her. Every muscle in her body seemed tense, waiting for that one name to break the silence. The judge paused, scanning the crowd with a deliberate slowness. Amara's palms were sweating, and her stomach was in knots. "Amara Johnson," the judge said, smiling warmly. "Congratulations, you are the winner of this year's regional competition." For a moment, Amara couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her name echoed in her ears, but it didn't seem real. It couldn't be her. She looked over at Maya, whose face was lit up with excitement, and then to Mr. Thompson, who was clapping with a wide grin. Amara's hands trembled as she stood up, feeling like she was floating. She slowly made her way toward the stage, her legs shaky as if she were walking in a dream. When she reached the podium, the head judge extended his hand to her. "Congratulations," the judge said, shaking her hand. "You've demonstrated exceptional talent, passion, and dedication. We're excited to see where your journey will take you next. Amara's voice caught in her throat as she finally spoke, her words coming out in a whisper. Thank you. This means more than I can say. She took the trophy they handed her, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic, of all the hours spent practicing, of the fears she had faced, of the self-doubt she had overcome. This trophy wasn't just a symbol of winning a competition, it was a symbol of her growth. The applause from the audience washed over her, but it didn't matter if they were clapping or cheering. She had already won. Not because of the trophy, but because she had taken a chance, faced her fears, and learned to believe in herself. As Amara walked off the stage, the cheers of the audience still ringing in her ears, she caught Maya's eye again. Her friend was grinning from ear to ear, and Amara couldn't help but smile back. You did it, Maya said, wrapping Amara in a big hug. I knew you would. Amara hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. We did it, Maya. This is just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. When was the last time you pushed through self-doubt to reach something amazing? The days following the competition felt like a whirlwind. Amara had won, and now she was facing the reality of what that victory meant. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends, family, and even a few teachers congratulating her. Maya was her biggest cheerleader, texting her constantly, and her mom couldn't stop smiling every time they talked. Despite the excitement and all the praise, Amara felt something else, a strange sense of emptiness. She had worked so hard for this moment, and now that it was here, she didn't quite know what to do with herself. The trophy sat on her desk, gleaming in the sunlight, a constant reminder of her accomplishment, but it didn't fill the void she was feeling. It felt like the end of a chapter, and she wasn't sure what the next one looked like yet. Amara had always been someone who thrived on challenges. She loved the idea of pushing herself, improving, and growing. But now that she had achieved something big, she felt an odd sense of uncertainty. Was this the peak? Was there more to her journey, or had she reached the highest point already? Her thoughts swirled as she sat at her piano, staring at the keys, feeling oddly disconnected. She had never imagined that winning a competition would leave her with so many questions. She had thought that this victory would answer everything, that it would bring clarity and a sense of fulfillment. But instead, it only made her wonder what was next. Amara, her mom called, interrupting her thoughts. Can we talk for a minute? Amara glanced up, and her mom stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. She had that concerned look on her face, the one Amara had seen so many times when she was lost in thought or struggling with something. Sure, Mom, Amara replied, sitting back from the piano. Her mom stepped into the room, sitting beside her on the bench. She set the tea down and smiled gently. You've been pretty quiet lately. I can tell something's on your mind. Amara hesitated, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but there was this nagging feeling in the back of her mind that she couldn't shake. I don't know. I thought I'd feel different after winning. But instead, I just feel lost, I guess. Like I've reached the top, and now what? Her mom nodded, as if she understood exactly where Amara was coming from. I get it. You've worked so hard for this moment, and now you're standing at the top of a mountain. But sometimes, when you get to the top, you have to decide where to go next. It's not about the mountain you just climbed, it's about what's ahead. Amara frowned. But what if I don't know what's ahead? Her mom smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze Amara's hand. That's okay. Not knowing what's next is part of the process. It's not always about having a clear path laid out in front of you. Sometimes, it's about trusting that the next step will come to you when the time is right. Amara thought about her mom's words, letting them sink in. She hadn't considered it that way. All this time, she had been focused on achieving the next thing, the next goal, the next victory. But maybe the journey wasn't just about reaching the next destination, it was about enjoying the process, even when it wasn't clear where the road would take her. I think I understand, Amara said, her voice quieter now. I don't have to know exactly what's next. I can just keep going, keep learning, and trust that something will come up. Her mom smiled, clearly proud of her. Exactly. And you don't have to have it all figured out today. Just take things one step at a time, and remember to enjoy the ride. A few days later, Amara found herself back in her familiar environment at school. The usual hum of activity surrounded her, students chatting in the halls, teachers rushing between classrooms, the normal rhythms of a busy day. But everything felt different now. She had won the regional competition, and that victory had given her a new sense of purpose. Still, she didn't want to let it define her. She knew that life wasn't just about accomplishments, it was about finding joy in the everyday moments, in the process of growing and learning. Maya was waiting for her at lunch, grinning like she had just won a prize herself. "So, how does it feel to be a local hero?" she teased, her voice full of excitement. Amara smiled, sitting down across from her. "It's surreal. I'm still processing it. But you know, there's a part of me that feels like there's more I need to do. Like this isn't the end, but just the beginning." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Oh. What's next then?" Amara shrugged, not sure yet, but feeling the pull of something new, something beyond the competition. "I don't know yet. But I think I need to figure out where my music can take me next. I want to keep playing, keep challenging myself. Maybe it's time for a new kind of challenge. I don't want to just win. I want to grow." Maya's smile softened. "That's exactly why I knew you'd win. You're not just doing it for the trophy or the title, you're doing it because you love it. And that's what makes you special." Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest. Maya always knew how to make her feel like she was enough, exactly as she was. And for the first time in a while, Amara felt at peace with where she was. Later that day, Mr. Thompson stopped her in the hallway, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Amara, I just wanted to say congratulations again. You did an incredible job at the competition." "Thanks, Mr. Thompson," Amara replied, her voice sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we grow by challenging ourselves. I think I want to keep pushing myself. Not just in competitions, but in ways that help me grow as a person, too." He nodded, looking pleased. "That's exactly the right mindset. You're not just a winner because of the trophy, Amara. You're a winner because you're always looking for ways to grow, to learn, and to improve. And that, my dear, is the most important thing." Amara smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. She wasn't just a winner because of one competition. She was a winner because she had the courage to keep going, to keep growing, and to trust herself along the way. It was early one morning when the phone call came. Amara had just finished her breakfast and was sitting at the kitchen table, mindlessly scrolling through her phone when her mother walked in with a big smile on her face, holding the landline receiver in her hand. "Amara, someone wants to talk to you," her mom said, her voice tinged with excitement. Amara frowned, puzzled. "Who is it?" "It's a call from the director of the prestigious New York City Music Academy," her mom replied. "He said they were impressed by your performance and wanted to offer you a scholarship to attend their summer music program." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She took the phone from her mom, suddenly feeling as if she were in a dream. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaky. "Amara Johnson," the deep, calm voice on the other end said. "This is Mr. Harris, the director of the New York City Music Academy. We had the privilege of watching your performance at the regional competition, and we were thoroughly impressed. We would love to offer you a spot in our summer program, with a full scholarship. We believe you have great potential, and we would love for you to further develop your skills with us." Amara couldn't speak at first. Her mind raced. A scholarship to one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. It felt unreal. She had spent so much time wondering what was next, and now here it was, an opportunity she had never imagined. Wow, thank you so much, Amara finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm honored. I don't know what to say. We're thrilled that you're considering it, Mr. Harris continued. There's a lot of competition, and we see something special in you. We believe you could really thrive in our program. Of course, we understand that you might need some time to think it over, but we hope you'll accept the offer. Amara sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. A scholarship to one of the top music academies in the world. Her dream, something that had once seemed impossible, was now a very real possibility. Yes, she said, finally finding her voice. I'd love to. Thank you so much. This is incredible. That's wonderful, Mr. Harris replied. I'll send over the details of the program and everything you need to know. We're excited to have you join us. We'll be in touch soon. After the call ended, Amara stood there, holding the phone in her hand, not quite able to believe it. Her mind was buzzing, and her heart was racing. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now she was being offered something even bigger than she had dreamed. Her mom was standing nearby, watching her with a proud smile. I'm so happy for you, Amara. This is a huge opportunity. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her mom. I can't believe it. This is the chance of a lifetime. The next few days were filled with a flurry of excitement and paperwork. Amara read through the documents that Mr. Harris had sent, each one detailing the program schedule, the instructors, and the specific goals of the summer program. She also researched the school further, learning about the incredible history of the academy and the many successful musicians who had once walked its halls. Despite the joy she felt at the prospect of attending the academy, there was a sense of uncertainty gnawing at her. This was a big step, a leap into a world she had only imagined until now. The pressure of leaving her home, her family, and the comfort of her small town loomed over her. She had never been away from home for this long, and the idea of being in a big city like New York was both exciting and intimidating. Amara, are you okay? Maya asked one afternoon, sensing the change in her friend. You've been a little distant lately. Amara sighed, looking up from her phone. I don't know, Maya. I'm thrilled about the scholarship, don't get me wrong. It's just, a lot to take in. I've always dreamed of something like this, but now that it's real, I'm not sure I'm ready. New York is huge. And I'd be away from home for weeks. Maya nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. I get it. It's a huge change. But Amara, you've been preparing for this your whole life. You've got the talent, the drive, and the heart. And you've got me cheering for you, no matter what. Amara smiled, feeling the warmth of her friend's support. Thanks, Maya. I'm afraid of failing, you know. What if I get there and I'm not good enough? What if I mess up? Maya reached out and gave her a reassuring squeeze. You're already good enough, Amara. You've already proven that. You're going to do amazing things, no matter where you are. Amara felt a surge of gratitude for Maya's unwavering faith in her. She had always been the one to help Amara see the bigger picture, to push her when she needed it most. As much as Amara was nervous about the unknown, she knew Maya was right. She had worked too hard to let fear stand in her way. That night, as Amara lay in bed, she thought about everything that had led her to this point. She thought about her struggles, her triumphs, and the person she had become along the way. This was a chance to take her music to the next level, to immerse herself in a world of learning, growth, and opportunity. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about for years, and now it was within her reach. As she drifted off to sleep, a sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. The days leading up to Amara's departure for New York felt like a blur. It was hard to believe how quickly everything had changed. One moment, she was a local girl competing in a regional piano competition, and the next, she was preparing to leave for one of the most prestigious music programs in the world. The opportunity felt surreal, but also thrilling. Amara couldn't help but wonder how her life would be different after this summer. The night before her departure, her mom sat down with her in the living room, where they had shared countless quiet evenings over the years. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the silence between them. "You're leaving tomorrow," her mom said, her voice tinged with both pride and a touch of sadness. "How are you feeling?" Amara looked at her mom, her heart heavy but full of excitement. "I'm nervous. But mostly excited. I've dreamed of this, Mom. I can't believe it's finally happening." Her mom smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Amara's face. "You've worked so hard for this. I know it's going to be an amazing experience for you. But it's okay to be nervous. Change is always a little scary, especially when it's something big. But remember, you've got everything you need inside of you to succeed." Amara nodded, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. Her mom's words meant everything to her. She had always been there, encouraging her, helping her chase her dreams. And now, Amara was about to embark on a journey that would take her farther than she had ever imagined. "I'm going to miss you so much," Amara whispered. "I'm going to miss you, too," her mom said, pulling her into a tight hug. "But I'll be here cheering you on every step of the way. And remember, you're never too far away. You can always call, and I'll always be here for you." Amara closed her eyes, squeezing her mom tightly. The thought of being so far from home was overwhelming, but knowing her mom was just a phone call away made it feel a little more bearable. The next morning, the reality of the situation hit her all over again. Amara stood in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting the straps of her bag. Her suitcase, packed with clothes and music sheets, sat by the door, waiting to be loaded into the car. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in a long while, Amara realized how much she was going to miss the familiarity of home. Her friends, her piano, her neighborhood, all of it was about to change. "Ready?" her mom called from downstairs, snapping Amara out of her thoughts. Amara took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be." She grabbed her suitcase, walking downstairs where her mom was waiting with a warm smile and a stack of snacks for the road. The drive to the airport was filled with a mix of silence and occasional chatter. Amara could sense her mom was trying to hold back tears, but Amara was determined to stay strong. As they walked through the airport, Amara felt a twinge of anxiety rise in her chest. The crowds, the noise, the unfamiliarity, it all felt so overwhelming. The airport was like another world. A place where people were always moving, always going somewhere. "Here we are," her mom said softly as they reached the security checkpoint. "You've got this, Amara. You're going to do amazing things. I'm so proud of you." Amara squeezed her mom's hand, fighting back tears. "I love you, Mom. I'll keep you updated, I promise. I know you will. Take care of yourself, and remember, you're never alone." Amara hugged her mom tightly, then turned to go through security. Her heart felt heavy, but she knew this was a step she had to take. She had dreams to chase, and they were waiting for her on the other side of this journey. The flight was long, and Amara spent most of it staring out the window, watching the clouds pass by as she thought about everything that had led her here. The familiar comforts of home were slipping further away, and soon she would be in a new city, surrounded by strangers. But even though the unknown was scary, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly where she was meant to be. When she finally arrived in New York, the excitement hit her in waves. The city was alive in a way she had never experienced before. The streets buzzed with energy, and every corner seemed to hold something new and exciting. It was so different from her small town, fast-paced, overwhelming, and full of possibilities. Amara took a deep breath as she stepped out of the taxi and onto the sidewalk, her luggage in tow. She was here. She had made it. The next few days were a blur of orientation sessions, meeting new people, and settling into her new environment. The academy's campus was beautiful, old brick buildings with ivy crawling up the walls, and the sweet smell of fresh coffee wafting from the cafe. But Amara couldn't help but feel out of place at first. Everyone she met seemed so confident, so sure of themselves, while she felt like an outsider. On the first day of classes, she was introduced to the other students in the program. They came from all over the world, and some of them were already accomplished musicians, with resumes longer than Amara's. She couldn't help but feel a little intimidated as she looked around the room, wondering if she was really cut out for this. But when she sat down at the piano for her first lesson, everything changed. The nervousness melted away as her fingers touched the keys. It was just her and the music. In that moment, she knew she belonged here. Her instructor, a kind and patient man named Professor Simmons, smiled at her as she finished playing a short piece. "You have great potential, Amara. I can see that you've worked hard to get here. But remember, this is just the beginning. Let's see how far we can take you." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with both excitement and determination. She had a long road ahead of her, but she was ready. This was the start of something bigger than she had ever imagined. And no matter what challenges she would face, Amara knew one thing for sure: she was going to give it her all. The first few weeks at the New York City Music Academy felt like a whirlwind. Amara had never experienced anything like this before: constant classes, late-night rehearsals, and the overwhelming buzz of the city surrounding her every step. The city that never sleeps was alive with energy, but for Amara, that energy often felt like an avalanche. Each day, she faced new challenges. The coursework was more demanding than anything she had encountered back home. She had always been a standout student in her small town, but here, everyone seemed to have a higher level of skill and experience. Her fellow musicians played with an ease and confidence that made Amara question her own abilities. There was Tanya, a girl from Boston, who had perfect technique. Her fingers seemed to fly across the keys with effortless precision. Amara found herself envious of how she made every piece sound so fluid and polished. Then there was Carlos, a gifted pianist from Spain, who was already studying at a conservatory before applying to the academy. He was talented, yes, but his arrogance often rubbed Amara the wrong way. And then there was Amara herself, an outsider in every way. The other students, all from prestigious music schools and renowned programs, had all the connections, the advantages, and the confidence that came from years of training. But Amara had something different, something that no one could take away from her: her passion. Yet, despite her undeniable drive, the pressure started to feel suffocating. She couldn't help but wonder if she was out of her depth. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult piano lesson where she had stumbled through a piece she had once been able to play effortlessly, Amara found herself sitting alone in the courtyard, watching the other students practice and socialize. The weight of doubt began to settle heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't like them. She wasn't good enough. She wasn't even sure why she was there. Just then, Maya's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of what her friend had told her before she left. "You've already proven that you're good enough, Amara. You've already done things that others could only dream of." Amara sighed, running her fingers through her hair. She needed a break. She needed to get away from the academy for a while. So, without thinking too much, she grabbed her bag and walked out the gates of the academy. Amara had always loved music, but sometimes the best way to find your way back to your passion was to step away from it for a little while. She wandered the streets of New York, letting the city guide her. The sounds, the colors, the hustle, it was all so different from what she had known. She marveled at the skyscrapers, the street vendors, the endless possibilities around every corner. Her feet eventually took her to a small park, a peaceful retreat tucked away from the noise of the city. She sat on a bench, taking a deep breath. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the landscape, and for the first time in weeks, Amara felt a sense of calm. As she closed her eyes and listened to the distant hum of the city, she realized something important. She was here because she loved music, because she wanted to grow. But she couldn't let the fear of not being good enough hold her back. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had already come this far. She wasn't about to let self-doubt stop her now. Amara spent the next few hours wandering the city, finding herself in places that inspired her. She found an old bookstore, one of those hidden gems that seemed to exist only in the movies. The smell of paper and ink filled the air, and as she walked through the aisles, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. It was during this exploration that Amara stumbled upon a small jazz bar tucked away on a side street. The sound of smooth piano music drifted from within. Her curiosity piqued, she stepped inside. The dimly lit room was intimate, filled with a cozy atmosphere. A live jazz band was playing, and at the center was an older man, gray hair, a weathered face, but hands that moved like lightning across the keys. He was playing with so much soul, so much life, that Amara felt a rush of energy course through her. The music was raw and real, a reflection of years of experience and emotion. Amara sat at a small table, mesmerized by the performance. There was something about the way the man played. He wasn't perfect. His technique was rough around the edges, but the feeling he infused into every note was extraordinary. She could see how much he loved the music. It wasn't about playing the right notes, it was about expressing something deep, something real. As the performance came to an end, the man stepped down from the stage and walked over to where Amara was sitting. He smiled at her, his eyes twinkling with a knowing look. "You've got the look of a musician who's searching for something," he said. "What brings you here, kid?" Amara was taken aback but smiled shyly. "I'm a student at the New York City Music Academy," she said, unsure of how to explain herself. I don't know. I've been struggling, and I needed a break." The man nodded knowingly. "I get it. You're not the first young person to come through here with that look on their face. You're trying to find your way, but you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Music is about feeling, not perfection. If you can't let go of your fear, then it'll hold you back." Amara listened intently. His words struck a chord within her. She was so focused on being perfect, so focused on achieving a standard of excellence, that she had forgotten why she fell in love with music in the first place. "You know what?" the man continued, "don't worry so much about what other people are doing. It's not about being the best. It's about being true to yourself, your sound, your story. The rest will follow." Amara smiled softly, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. This was what she had been searching for. Not the pressure to be the best, but the freedom to be herself, to find her own voice in the music. As she left the jazz bar, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. Amara realized she wasn't here to compete with anyone else. She was here to find herself, to discover the music inside her. And with that thought, a sense of peace washed over her. The next few weeks were filled with hard work, but Amara's mindset had shifted. The conversation at the jazz bar had sparked something deep inside of her. She no longer felt like she had to measure up to everyone else's expectations or be the best in the room. Instead, she focused on finding her own voice, the unique sound that belonged to her and only her. Her practice sessions at the academy became less about perfection and more about exploration. She spent hours experimenting with different styles, from classical pieces to jazz improvisations. She even started adding her own twists to pieces she'd been playing for years. The music felt different now. It wasn't just about following a score, it was about expressing emotion, telling a story, and creating something that was all her own. Professor Simmons noticed the change in her as well. During one of their one-on-one sessions, Amara played a piece she had been working on. It wasn't flawless, but there was something raw and powerful in her playing. As she finished, he looked at her with a proud smile. "Amara," he said, "I've seen a lot of students over the years, but I haven't seen someone play with this much heart in a long time. Your technique is improving, but what's even more exciting is the passion you're putting into your playing. It's real. That's what music is all about." Amara beamed, feeling like the weight she had been carrying for so long had finally lifted. For the first time, she wasn't just trying to impress others, she was playing for herself, and that made all the difference. But while Amara was finding her own rhythm in the music, her struggles with self-doubt weren't entirely gone. It was a constant battle to push past the fears that still crept into her mind. There were days when she felt like she was back to square one, questioning if she was good enough or if she really belonged in such a competitive environment. One particularly difficult night, Amara found herself back in the courtyard, alone with her thoughts. The familiar sense of frustration began to build up. Her fingers weren't moving the way she wanted them to on the keys, and the music felt out of reach again. "Why is it so hard?" she whispered to herself, staring at her reflection in the glass of the building across the courtyard. She had worked so hard to get here, but at that moment, everything seemed uncertain. The feeling of being an outsider, of not being as good as the other students, crept back into her mind. She thought about all the sacrifices her mom had made to support her, all the dreams they had shared about her future. What if she wasn't cut out for this? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Amara pulled it out, wiping away a tear before anyone could see. It was a message from Maya. "I'm so proud of you, Amara. I know it's hard right now, but you've come so far. I'm rooting for you, always. Don't give up." The words hit her harder than she expected. Maya had always believed in her, even when Amara couldn't believe in herself. For the first time in a while, Amara felt the weight of her self-doubt start to ease. She was doing this, not just for her, but for all the people who had supported her. She couldn't give up now. With renewed determination, Amara stood up and headed back to the practice rooms. She knew there would be tough days ahead, but she also knew that those days didn't define her. It was the small victories, the moments of growth, that mattered. And today, she was going to give it her all. The following week, Amara faced a new challenge. The academy was holding a student recital, and Professor Simmons asked her to perform a piece she had been working on for weeks. Normally, this would have excited her, but the thought of playing in front of a crowd made her stomach turn. Her hands began to sweat just thinking about it. But she didn't want to back down. She had made so much progress, this was her chance to prove to herself, more than anyone else, that she had the strength to overcome her fears. The night of the recital arrived, and Amara stood backstage, feeling her heart race. She could hear the applause from the audience as each student performed, and the pressure built with every passing moment. When her name was called, she felt like her legs were made of stone. She had to do this. She had to show herself that she could. With a deep breath, she walked out onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her momentarily. The audience was a blur, but Amara focused on the piano in front of her. She sat down, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. As the first notes filled the room, everything else faded away. She lost herself in the music. The nerves that had plagued her disappeared, replaced by the flow of emotion that surged through her. She played with the freedom she had discovered in herself, no longer afraid of making mistakes, but embracing each note, each chord, as part of the story she was telling. By the time she finished the piece, the room was silent for a moment before a wave of applause filled the air. Amara sat there, her chest heaving, unsure of what to feel. She had done it. She had conquered her fear. When she left the stage, Professor Simmons was waiting for her backstage, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Amara. That was incredible. Your playing has a fire in it that I haven't seen in a long time. You've come so far." Amara smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel good about what she had achieved. She wasn't perfect, but she was growing. And that was enough. The weeks after the recital were filled with an overwhelming sense of accomplishment for Amara. She had stepped onto the stage with fear, but walked off with a newfound sense of confidence. The music academy was beginning to feel less like a mountain she had to climb and more like a space where she could explore, experiment, and grow. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving here, she was thriving. But, as often happens when life seems to be going smoothly, a setback came when she least expected it. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, and the academy had scheduled another round of evaluations. Professor Simmons had asked Amara to perform a new piece, a challenging Beethoven sonata she had been working on for the past few weeks. Amara had been confident. She had practiced tirelessly, and she felt ready. She knew the piece inside out. But something was different today. As she walked into the room, Amara could feel a knot in her stomach. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sat at the piano, and when she looked up to see Professor Simmons watching her intently, the pressure intensified. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first, everything seemed fine. The notes flowed smoothly, and her fingers moved with practiced ease across the keys. But then, in the middle of the second movement, it happened. A wrong note. A jarring, dissonant sound that felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the room. Amara froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and her mind raced. She could hear Professor Simmons' voice in her head, urging her to keep going, but her fingers felt stiff, disconnected. She tried to push through, but the more she played, the more out of tune and out of sync her hands seemed to become. It was as if her body was no longer cooperating with her mind. Her confidence began to erode with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stopped playing. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she looked up at Professor Simmons, whose expression was unreadable. The silence in the room was thick and suffocating. "I'm sorry, Professor," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened." Professor Simmons stood up slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Amara," he said in a calm but firm tone, "I've seen this happen before. You're trying too hard to control everything. You're focusing on perfection instead of the music itself. This is a good reminder that no matter how much you prepare, sometimes things just don't go as planned." Amara's heart sank. She felt like a failure, like she had let everyone down. She had worked so hard, but all she had managed to do was mess up in front of her mentor. Her mind spun with doubts. What if she couldn't do this? What if she wasn't cut out for this level of competition? What if she was just pretending to be something she wasn't? I'll work harder, I promise," Amara stammered, her voice cracking. Professor Simmons looked at her, his gaze softening. "Amara, you don't need to promise me anything. What I want you to understand is this: sometimes, the best thing you can do is to let go. Stop trying to be perfect. Let the music breathe. Let it flow through you, not because you want to impress anyone, but because it's who you are. You have the talent, Amara. You have the heart. Now you need to trust yourself more." Those words hit her hard. They felt like a balm on the wound of her frustration. She was so focused on getting everything right that she had forgotten why she started playing the piano in the first place, because it made her feel alive. Amara spent the rest of the day wandering the streets of the city, lost in thought. The drizzle had turned into a steady downpour, and the streets were emptying as people rushed to get out of the rain. She found herself walking down a familiar street, past the jazz bar where she had spent that fateful evening weeks ago. The music from within spilled into the street, reminding her of the lessons she had learned that night. On impulse, she stepped inside. The same man from before was at the piano, his fingers moving with ease as he played a soulful melody. This time, there were fewer people in the bar, just a handful of patrons scattered around the dimly lit room. The music was warm and inviting, wrapping itself around Amara as she found a seat in the corner. The man finished his song and looked up, catching her eye. He smiled knowingly. "Back again?" he asked with a laugh. Amara nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "I needed to hear something real again." He chuckled, setting his hands on the keys. "That's what music is, kid. It's real, even when it's messy. It's not about perfection. It's about being true to yourself." His words echoed in Amara's mind, reminding her of the lesson Professor Simmons had tried to teach her. She couldn't keep chasing perfection, it was an endless race that would only leave her exhausted. She had to embrace the beauty of imperfection, the spontaneity of the music. She stayed in the bar for hours, listening to the music and letting it fill her soul. By the time she left, the rain had stopped, and the world felt a little quieter, a little clearer. The next morning, Amara walked into her piano lesson with a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined not to let the setback from the day before define her. As she sat down at the piano, she took a deep breath and remembered the lessons she had learned, both from Professor Simmons and from the jazz pianist. This time, she wasn't going to force the music. She was going to let it come to her, to flow through her naturally. And as her fingers touched the keys, something magical happened. The music began to feel alive again. Her hands moved with confidence, each note filled with emotion. She wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. She was just playing because it felt right. The piece flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in days, Amara felt at peace with her playing. When she finished, Professor Simmons smiled at her, clearly impressed. "Now that's what I like to see," he said. "You've learned the most important lesson, to let the music come from your heart." Amara smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made a mistake, yes. But she had learned from it, and that was what mattered. It wasn't the end of her journey, it was just a stepping stone. And with every setback, she would grow stronger, more resilient. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Amara. She had found her rhythm again, embracing the highs and lows that came with learning the piano. Her confidence had been shaken by her previous setback, but it had also been strengthened by the lessons she had learned. She knew that life, like music, wasn't always going to be perfect, and that was okay. What mattered was her ability to pick herself up and keep going, one note at a time. One afternoon, just as she was finishing a particularly intense practice session, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, expecting it to be a message from Maya or her mom, but it was something unexpected, an email from the prestigious international music competition that had been on her radar since she first arrived at the academy. The subject line read, "Invitation to audition for the International Piano Competition." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The email explained that based on her recent recital and evaluation, she had been selected to audition for the competition in New York City, a major opportunity for young pianists. Her hands shook as she read through the details. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. But more than that, the invitation felt like a validation of all the hard work she had put in. She wasn't just another student anymore. She was being recognized for her talent. For a moment, Amara sat still, the weight of the invitation sinking in. This was the chance she had been waiting for, an opportunity to prove to herself, and to everyone who had doubted her, that she belonged. But there was also the pressure of competition, the fear that she might not be good enough to make it past the first round. The doubts that had once seemed distant crept back into her mind, and she couldn't help but feel nervous. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Maya. "I saw the news. I'm so proud of you, Amara. You've got this. No matter what happens, this is just the beginning for you. I believe in you 100%. Let's celebrate when you get back." Amara smiled at the words, but the nerves didn't go away. She wasn't sure if she was ready for such a big challenge, but the thought of quitting, of not even trying, was even harder to bear. She had come this far, and this was the moment she had been working towards all along. She quickly replied, "Thanks, Maya. I'm scared, but I'm going to do it. No turning back now." The day of the audition arrived quicker than she expected. Amara had spent the last few weeks preparing for this moment, poring over the repertoire she had chosen for the competition. She had practiced every note, every phrase, but the reality of what she was about to face still felt overwhelming. She stepped off the plane at the airport in New York City, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling within her. The city was alive, bustling with energy, and it felt like a dream to be there. But even amid the excitement, Amara couldn't shake the weight of the competition. There were so many talented pianists here, some of them had been playing since they could walk, and the pressure of performing among them felt like a heavy burden. She arrived at the competition venue, an elegant concert hall with tall ceilings and ornate details. She marveled at the beauty of the place but also felt a sense of intimidation. This was no small competition. It was a global stage where dreams could either be realized or shattered in a matter of minutes. As she checked in and received her number for the audition, Amara's nerves were in overdrive. She hadn't expected to feel this scared. This was it, the moment that would determine whether all her hard work had been worth it. She was about to step into a room with some of the best pianists in the world. She couldn't afford to mess this up. Her name was called, and Amara walked toward the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. The lights were bright, the audience was silent, and she felt all eyes on her. The judges sat in a row, watching her closely as she took a deep breath and sat at the grand piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, as if asking for permission to start. Then, she began to play. At first, the nerves were overwhelming. Her fingers felt stiff, and her mind raced, but she reminded herself to breathe. She let the music guide her, letting go of the expectations that had been weighing her down. As she played, she focused on the flow of the music, the rise and fall of the melody, the emotion it carried. Each note was a reminder of the passion that had first led her to the piano. She wasn't playing to impress the judges. She was playing because the music had become a part of her. By the time she reached the final movement, Amara felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was no longer afraid. The music had taken control, and she was simply a vessel for it. The last note echoed in the hall, and for a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, the audience erupted into applause. Amara's heart raced as she stood up, giving a modest bow. She had done it. She had put her heart into the performance and left it all on the stage. When she stepped off the stage, the competition coordinator came over to congratulate her. "That was incredible, Amara. I'm sure the judges will be impressed. You've got something special." Amara's legs felt weak as she smiled back, trying to catch her breath. She had no idea what the outcome would be, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't felt before. She had played from her heart, and no matter what happened, she knew that was enough. As she left the hall and stepped back into the busy streets of New York, Amara couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had started her journey as a young girl who doubted herself at every turn, but now, she was standing on a global stage, playing her music for the world to hear. She was no longer just trying to prove something to others. She was proving it to herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest achievement of all. Amara sat in the quiet corner of a New York City cafe, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She had been in the city for 2 days now, waiting to hear back from the judges of the International Piano Competition. The competition had been a whirlwind, a surreal experience that felt like a dream. The applause, the rush of emotions as she played, and the overwhelming sense of achievement when she finished her piece were still fresh in her mind. But now, as the days passed and she was left alone with her thoughts, doubt began to creep in once more. She had done everything she could. She had poured her heart into that performance. But was it enough? The other pianists were incredible, and though the judges had seemed impressed, she couldn't help but wonder if they saw something she missed. It was easy to let the doubts slip in, the ones that told her she wasn't enough, that she hadn't done enough. The sound of her phone buzzing on the table broke her from her thoughts. She picked it up, half expecting to see a message from Maya or her mom checking in, but instead, it was an email from the competition's coordinator. Subject: Results of the International Piano Competition Audition. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened the email, her eyes scanning the lines quickly before landing on the section that listed the names of those who had been selected to move forward to the final round. Her name wasn't at the top of the list. Her heart sank. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had been so sure that she had done well. How could this happen? Her hands trembled as she read through the rest of the list. She searched for her name again, her mind desperately trying to find it among the others. And then, at the very bottom, in small, unassuming text, she saw it. Amara Williams, selected for final round. Her breath caught. Her stomach flipped in disbelief. She had made it. She had made it to the final round of one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the email again, a smile breaking across her face. She had done it. She wasn't just a participant. She was one of the best, standing among the top young pianists in the world. It wasn't just a dream, it was real. Amara stood backstage at the Grand Concert Hall the day of the final round, feeling a wave of nervous energy wash over her. The sound of the audience murmuring, the buzz of anticipation, all blended into a soft hum in her ears. Her heart raced as she adjusted her dress and tried to calm her nerves. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the words of Professor Simmons and the jazz pianist in New York, "Let the music breathe." This was her chance to not just play a piece, but to live the music. She wasn't here to chase perfection. She was here to share her heart. She began to play. The music flowed from her fingers, each note clear and full of emotion. Her nerves began to fade away, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was in the moment, lost in the sound of the piano, the rise and fall of the melody, the way the music connected with her soul. She wasn't thinking about the judges, or the other pianists, or the outcome. She was simply playing because it felt right. As she reached the final movement, her fingers moved with a fluidity she hadn't known was possible. She felt a surge of energy, as if the music was carrying her forward. When the last note rang out, the silence in the hall was deafening. For a second, time seemed to stop. And then, as though on cue, the audience erupted into applause. Amara blinked, her heart still racing. She had done it. She had played her best, and in that moment, she was at peace. Backstage, Amara's hands were shaking as she wiped the sweat from her palms. She tried to calm her breathing, but it was difficult. The moment she had just experienced felt so surreal. What would the judges think? Had she been good enough? Had she communicated the emotions she wanted to express? Soon enough, the results were announced. One by one, the names of the finalists were called. Her heart hammered in her chest as she listened, hoping, praying that hers would be among them. Amara Williams, the announcer said. A flood of relief washed over her, followed by a burst of pride. She had made it. She was one of the top pianists in the world. No matter the outcome of the competition, she knew this was the beginning of something incredible. The journey back to the academy was filled with excitement and anticipation. Amara had done it, she had proven to herself that she belonged. Whether or not she won the competition, the experience had been life-changing. She had discovered a side of herself she didn't know existed, the strength to push through fear, the vulnerability to embrace the music, and the courage to stand up on the biggest stage she could imagine. Back at the academy, her classmates congratulated her, amazed by her achievement. Even Professor Simmons, who had been hard on her at times, gave her a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Amara," he said. "I'm proud of you." You've learned the most important lesson of all, to trust yourself. Amara smiled, her heart full. She knew there was still more to learn, more to experience, and more to achieve. But for now, she was content. She had made it, and this was only the beginning. The weeks after the competition passed in a blur for Amara. She had returned home to a warm welcome from her family and friends, but there was a part of her that felt changed, as if she had stepped out of one life and into another. The feeling of accomplishment still lingered, but so did the pressure of what came next. Her place in the final round had confirmed something she had known all along: she had a gift. But now, she had to decide how to use it. As she settled back into her routine, Amara couldn't shake the sense of possibility that the competition had ignited in her. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future performances, future competitions, opportunities to perform on grand stages, and maybe even collaborations with some of the finest musicians in the world. But even as she envisioned these dreams, there was a growing sense of uncertainty about what her next steps should be. She had spent so many years focusing on perfecting her craft, pushing herself to meet the high standards she had set for herself. But now, she realized that her journey was about more than just becoming a great pianist. It was about finding her voice in the music, creating something that was uniquely her own. Amara had grown so much over the past few months. She had learned not just about music, but about herself. She had learned to trust in her ability, to push through her insecurities, and to embrace the power of vulnerability in her playing. But now, she needed to figure out where her path would lead. It was a Sunday morning when Amara received a phone call that would change everything. "Hello, is this Amara Williams?" a voice on the other end asked. "Yes, speaking," Amara replied, her heart skipping a beat. Who could be calling her? "This is Lila Harrington, from the prestigious Greenhill Music Foundation," the voice continued. "We've been following your recent achievements, and we were deeply impressed by your performance at the International Piano Competition." Amara sat up straighter, a mix of surprise and excitement flooding her chest. The Greenhill Music Foundation was known for mentoring and funding the careers of promising young musicians. This was a big deal. "We would love to offer you a scholarship to our elite summer music program in Paris," Lila said. "It's a competitive program, but after seeing your performance, we believe you would be a perfect fit." Amara could hardly believe what she was hearing. Paris. The city of music. The city where some of the greatest musicians of all time had come to hone their craft. She had dreamt of being there one day, but to have it happen so soon felt unreal. "Amara?" Lila's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you still there?" "Yes. I just, wow. I can't believe this." Amara stammered. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," Lila said with a smile in her voice. "Take your time to think about it, but I believe this could be a huge opportunity for your growth as an artist. The program is intense, but it's the kind of environment that pushes young musicians to find their true voice. We think you have what it takes." Amara was speechless. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Paris. A summer of intensive study, learning from renowned instructors and playing among some of the most talented young musicians in the world. This was a dream come true. She thanked Lila and promised to think it over. The call ended, but Amara sat in silence for several moments, trying to process what had just happened. Could she really do it? Could she leave everything behind for an entire summer, immerse herself in a world of music, and take the next step toward becoming the artist she always dreamed of being? The answer was clear. Yes. She had spent so long trying to prove herself, trying to fit into the expectations of others, and now it was time to take control of her future. The scholarship to the Greenhill Music Foundation was an incredible opportunity, and it was one she couldn't pass up. Over the next few weeks, Amara made preparations for her trip to Paris. The prospect of leaving home for an extended period of time was both exciting and daunting, but the more she thought about it, the more she knew it was the right choice. She would be surrounded by some of the most gifted musicians in the world, and that would push her to grow in ways she hadn't even imagined. As she packed her bags and prepared to say goodbye to her family, her friends, and her familiar surroundings, she felt a sense of gratitude. The path she had walked had been anything but easy, but it had led her here, right at the threshold of something even greater. Maya and Professor Simmons had both been incredibly supportive of her decision to attend the program. Maya had even promised to visit her in Paris, and Professor Simmons had offered to provide additional guidance before she left, ensuring she was well prepared for the challenges ahead. "Remember, Amara," Professor Simmons said during their final meeting before her departure. "Music is a journey. You don't always know where it will take you, but if you trust it, it will reveal itself to you in ways that will surprise you." Amara smiled at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had come so far, and yet the journey was far from over. The flight to Paris was long, but Amara couldn't stop thinking about the adventure that awaited her. When the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, her heart raced with anticipation. Paris was everything she had imagined, beautiful, historic, and filled with a palpable energy that made her feel like she was walking in the footsteps of great artists from centuries past. Her first day at the Greenhill Music Foundation was a whirlwind of introductions, rehearsals, and orientations. The facility was breathtaking, an old, stately building with gleaming wooden floors and grand pianos scattered throughout. It was the perfect environment for her to immerse herself in her craft. Amara couldn't wait to start, but there was still so much to learn. The competition, the scholarships, the accolades, all of it had been incredible. But now, in Paris, she realized that this was where she would truly define herself as an artist. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finding her voice and learning to share her music with the world. The days in Paris seemed to blur together, each one more filled with music, inspiration, and growth than the last. Amara had quickly settled into the rhythm of life at the Greenhill Music Foundation, waking up early for practice and spending the afternoons attending masterclasses with some of the most respected pianists and instructors in the world. Every note she played, every piece of advice she received, brought her one step closer to her dream. The pressure was intense, and the standards were high, but Amara was thriving. The sense of belonging she felt at Greenhill, surrounded by people who shared her passion and her drive, was something she had never experienced before. It was a place where talent, dedication, and creativity came together to shape the next generation of musicians. But even in the midst of this excitement, Amara felt something deeper growing inside her, a sense of self-awareness, a realization that her journey was never just about the accolades, the recognition, or even the competitions. It was about connecting with the music in a way that was uniquely her own. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace the vulnerabilities that came with being an artist, and to see every note not just as sound, but as a reflection of her inner world. And now, she could see the way forward, clearer and more open than ever before. It was one evening, after a particularly intense practice session, when Amara found herself standing in front of the grand piano in one of the foundation's smaller practice rooms. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the polished keys. For the first time since arriving in Paris, she felt completely at peace. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the piano, the music, and herself. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and without thinking, she began to play. It wasn't a piece she had been assigned, nor a competition piece. It was a melody that had been floating in her mind for days, something born from the emotions and experiences she had encountered on this journey. The music came from a place deep within her, a place that was no longer concerned with perfection but with expression. She closed her eyes as the music flowed through her, the notes rising and falling like waves, each one carrying a sense of freedom and joy. She wasn't thinking about what others would hear or how she would be judged. She was simply playing from her heart. When the last note lingered in the air and the music faded into silence, Amara opened her eyes, surprised at the sense of calm that had washed over her. For the first time in her life, she felt completely connected to the music, not as something to be mastered, but as something to be felt. The next few weeks passed in a blur of performances, rehearsals, and master classes, but one thing became clear: Amara was no longer the unsure, self-doubting young pianist who had first walked into Professor Simmons' class all those months ago. She had found her voice. She had found a part of herself that was fearless, creative, and ready to share her music with the world. On the final day of the program, the foundation hosted a closing concert. Amara stood backstage, waiting for her turn, feeling an odd sense of nostalgia mixed with excitement. This wasn't just the culmination of her summer in Paris, it was the beginning of something new, something that would last for the rest of her life. As she took her seat at the grand piano and the spotlight found her, she glanced out into the audience. She could see the faces of her fellow musicians, the instructors who had guided her, and the friends she had made over the last few weeks. They were all here to witness something important: her transformation. She began to play, not a piece of classical music, but something that was hers, something that came from her heart, from her experiences, from her journey. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every note carried with it the weight of her struggles, the triumphs of overcoming fear, and the realization that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. As the final chords echoed through the concert hall, a wave of applause swept over her. Amara stood up, her heart full, and took a bow. It wasn't just for the audience, it was for herself. In the months that followed, Amara's career began to take shape in ways she had never expected. The Greenhill Music Foundation had connected her with influential mentors, and opportunities to perform and collaborate with other musicians seemed to appear at every turn. The experiences in Paris had shaped her into a new artist, one who wasn't just focused on technical skill but on finding her own voice in the music. She began composing her own original pieces, experimenting with blending classical and modern influences. Her performances grew more confident, more daring, and more personal. She found that her true passion wasn't just about playing for the applause, it was about sharing the music that was uniquely hers with the world. Amara returned to the academy and picked up where she had left off, but this time, there was no doubt in her mind about what she wanted to achieve. She wasn't just chasing success or recognition anymore, she was chasing her passion, her love for the music, and her desire to create something that was meaningful. Professor Simmons, who had watched her evolve from a talented but unsure student into the confident young artist before him, couldn't have been prouder. "You've done more than just improve as a pianist, Amara," he told her one afternoon, as they sat together in the academy's quiet courtyard. "You've found your voice. And that's something that many never do. Now, you're not just playing music. You're living it." Amara smiled, feeling the weight of his words. She had come full circle. What had once felt like an insurmountable journey of self-doubt had become a path of self-discovery and growth. As she sat at the piano one evening, composing a new piece, Amara thought back to the moment when she had first arrived in Paris, uncertain of what the future held. She had come so far, beyond the competition, beyond the expectations, beyond the fear of failure. She was no longer just a student of music, she was a creator, an artist, someone whose story was just beginning. The future was still uncertain, and there would be many more challenges ahead, but for the first time, Amara was not afraid. She knew that no matter what came next, she had already found the most important thing of all, her voice. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?